Typically, when you learn about Alexander the Great and his empire, in school or elsewhere, the focus is on his father, Alexander's ascension to the throne, the conquest of Persia, and his son demise. Usually after his death, the textbook or narrator merely summarizes that his empire fell apart in a sentence or two. And I understand why. The aftermath was a chaotic mess of factionalism and betrayals, one after the other. But the events that transpired are very interesting, so I'm seeking to explain that here today. What caused Alexander the Great's death on either June 10th or June 11th, 323 BC is still unknown. There are two main accounts of his death. Both accounts have the king falling ill shortly after a bout of heavy drinking and passing away a week or two later. The causes hypothesized by historians range from some consequence of his old battle wounds to liver disease, malaria, typhoid fever, poisoning, and the list goes on and on. What was clear, however, was that he left this world with no successor. Two notable persons that would soon come into play were Perdiccas, a leading general of the army whom Alexander had gifted his signet ring just hours before his death, and Roxana, Alexander's wife, who was pregnant. A council was convened by Alexander's elite bodyguards at the royal quarters in Babylon. Though it was initially intended just for officers, common soldiers disregarded orders and forcefully entered the meeting. Perdiccas initiated the council by presenting Alexander's belongings. He addressed the crowd, acknowledging their grief and stressing the need for a leader to ensure the continuation of the empire. The primary point of discussion revolved around whether there should be one ruler or multiple rulers. Various proposals, such as appointing Heracles, Alexander's illegitimate son, put forth, but ultimately rejected by a vote. Ptolemy took the floor and argued against selecting either Heracles or the unborn child of Roxana, citing their mother's foreign captive status and that being ruled by either child would be tantamount to the conquered ruling the conquerors. Aristonus suggested returning the ring to Perdiccas, a proposition that received approval, although Perdiccas remained silent, seemingly expecting to be begged to assume the position. Meleager, recognizing an opportunity to challenge Perdiccas, claimed that voting for either Perdiccas or Heracles would yield the same outcome, as Perdiccas would end up as regent for the kid anyway. After this, some soldiers made threats of plundering the treasury, leading to the council to erupt in chaos. At this point, an ordinary soldier intervened and advocated for Aridaeus, Alexander's half-brother, to inherit the throne. After all, in Macedonian succession law, he was the rightful heir. Why was this council trying to cheat Aridaeus out of his inheritance? The crowd overwhelmingly agreed, disregarding Alexander's bodyguard Paethon, who pointed out Aridaeus' apparent mental disabilities. While the soldiers had a say in the matter, they were not officially part of the council. Thus Paethon proposed a new arrangement in which Perdiccas and Leonidas would act as guardians of Heracles, while Craterus and Antipater would administer Europe. Meleager vehemently opposed this and left, only to return with Aridaeus in a rather frightened state. Aridaeus attempted to escape, but was persuaded to come back, and Alexander's robe was placed around him. The soldiers threatened the council, demanding Aridaeus' acceptance as king, which compelled Perdiccas to call upon Alexander's 600 Persian bodyguards. These bodyguards, being Persian, naturally opposed the faction that rejected Alexander's sons due to being half Persian. As a result of the clash of egos among these esteemed commanders, on the very day of Alexander's death, right near his resting place, a battle had erupted. The Macedonians proved far superior to the Persian troops, and Meleager demanded Perdiccas' surrender, which he eventually agreed to. Meleager instructed the Persians to remain stationary while they searched for Perdiccas among the crowd, but it was too late. Perdiccas had already escaped. Outside Babylon, Perdiccas gathered his forces with the support of almost all the other generals of the army and severed the city's supply routes. The Macedonians within the city assessed the situation and realized that victory was unattainable, since all the commanders had sided with Perdiccas. Everyone, including Aridaeus, understood that Perdiccas would seek retribution against Meleager. Tearfully, Aridaeus declared that his willingness to renounce the throne to prevent any further bloodshed. He offered the crown to anyone who believed they deserved it. Touched by this sentiment, the soldiers reached a compromise. Aridaeus would become king, and Roxana's child would become co-king if it were a boy. Envoys were dispatched to Perdiccas, proposing the establishment of a triumvirate, consisting of Aridaeus, Perdiccas, and Meleager. Triumvirates were rather common power-sharing agreements in the ancient world, but if you know much about ancient history, you know they usually don't work out. And as you might have suspected, Perdiccas had set a trap. When Meleager and Perdiccas met outside the city with their armies to begin the reintegration ritual, they embraced. However, Meleager became infuriated upon hearing Perdiccas' men talk about how dissatisfied they were with the arrangement. Perdiccas reassured him that they would eliminate all the divisiveness within both armies, wink wink. The ceremony proceeded as expected, with the two armies beginning to intermingle and reconcile. However, Perdiccas arranged for Aridaeus to ride back and forth between the armies, singling out the ringleaders of the rebellion. These individuals were swiftly captured and executed. Meleager managed to flee and hide in a temple. but nevertheless he was hunted down and murdered, while the two factions of the army made peace. Shortly thereafter, the council reconvened, and the empire was divided among the loyal generals, with Perdiccas serving as regent over the entire realm. This event took place on June 18th, just a week after Alexander's death. Alexander the Great led a flawless career of 20 victories that would be imprinted into history forever. There'd be one great stain across this record, however, and that was his failure to pick a successor. This led to decades of death and destruction across his empire, as his former brothers in arms tore each other apart.